Today's headline is her 107th birthday. Mrs. Lucy Wood will greet her friends today. The subheadline says, was 3 years old when Washington was first inaugurated. Oldest pensioner of the United States. Pioneer life in Vermont woods. This article was originally reported from Barre, Vermont on January 15th. I have fought the good fight. I have kept the faith. This can be truly said by Mrs. Lucy Wood, who enjoys the proud distinction of being the oldest person in Vermont and the oldest woman in New England, as well as being the oldest person on the rolls of the pension department. 70 years and 7 is the remarkable age she reached today, when her relatives and friends are to assist the old lady in celebrating her 107th birthday. Although the records of Mrs. Wood's native town show her to have been born January 6th, it is related that Mrs. Wood a few years ago changed the date in the family Bible to the 16th, and she now insists on observing the later date. Mrs. Wood was born at Jaffrey, New Hampshire, January 6, 1786, and is therefore 3 years older than the federal government. She has witnessed the rise and fall of every political party and every presidential campaign from the days of Washington to those of Grover Cleveland's second triumph. Her maiden name was Lucy Whitney, being one of a family of 11 children. At the age of 9 years, her father moved to Milford, Massachusetts. During her 16th year, she was a pupil in a Milford singing school. John Wood, a young man from the adjoining town of Mendon, also trying to master the difficult talent. While rehearsing their parts together, Cupid accomplished his purpose, and on February 1st, 1803, the young couple were made man and wife by Amaria Frost. In 1805, they decided to become Vermonters and moved to this place, which was then only a mere swamp with no sign of the present Granite City. They made the trip from Massachusetts in a sleigh drawn by 2 horses. 8 days were required to make the journey. The young husband built a cottage on the East Hill. There were no doors or windows. The fireplace and chimney were constructed of stone, and the house was divided into 2 rooms by a blanket hung in the center. Mr. Wood erected an oven in the clearing outside the house, and Mrs. Wood proudly declares that the best cooking she has ever done was performed in that ancient oven. As soon as the house was finished, both husband and wife worked early and late to clear the land and burn the brushwood about the dwelling. On many nights during the absence of Mr. Wood, who had gone to the nearest settlement for supplies, the good wife had sat by the candlelight for the midnight hours, keeping a bright fire burning to scare away the wolves that were howling about the house. Sometimes they were brave enough to come by the blanket which covered the door, not daring to proceed further for fear of the flames. Mr. Wood was a teamster for the United States government in the War of 1812, his route being from Wells River to Burlington. The care of the farm and family devolved upon Mrs. Wood. During her husband's absence, the house caught fire and was devoured by the flames. She hastened to a place of safety, but remembering that her oldest child was sleeping in the house, she re-entered the building and took her child to a safe place. The brave woman was severely burned in this act, and still carries the scars. This daughter died a few years ago, aged 73. The neighbors proved to be friends in the hour of need, and when Mr. Wood returned home, greatly to his surprise, he found a new house nearly completed. In one of the early winters, there was no track of man or team at her door for a period of 6 weeks. Her oldest children went to school in a barn on the Carleton farm. There was but one preacher in town, Reverend Aaron Palmer. Robert Paddock was the only physician, and the only merchant was Jack Pollard. For his service in the Battle of Plattsburgh, Mr. Wood drew a land warrant. He died in the city March 24, 1857. After his death, Mrs. Wood managed the farm 7 years and then removed to Barre Village, where she now resides on Hill Street with her daughter Sophia, who is now 76 years old and spends her entire time caring for her aged mother. Mrs. Wood has had 10 of her children. 3 sons are now living: Charles, who resides at Orange, Phineas in Newport, and Warren at Auburn, Rhode Island. She claims to have 40 living grandchildren and a great-great-grandchild 17 years old. She is the last survivor of her father's family, there having been 5 older and 5 younger. In her 99th year, she made a bed quilt containing 5,876 pieces, which has taken premiums at several county fairs. To the casual visitor, she does not appear to be so old, although she is very thin and much wrinkled. Her memory is very good, and she remembers events of her childhood with perfect clearness, delighting to relate early reminiscences of the state and the noted men she has met. She can recall the events of the War of 1812, and often she has told the young people gathered about her how the patriotic men fought and the hardships they endured for their country in the early days of the present century. In her youth, Mrs. Wood was a Congregationalist, but after her marriage and settlement in Barry, she joined the Methodist Society and has since been a staunch adherent to its creeds. She retains her faculties to a remarkable degree, her only weakness being her great deafness and lameness. Though she can move about the house with the aid of chairs, she still retains her business faculty and until very recently conducted her own affairs. In 1891, Mrs. Wood petitioned Congress for a pension on the ground that her husband was a teamster in the War of 1812, and Congress by special act granted her $12 per month. Last year, Mrs. Wood was made a member of R.B. Crandall Women's Relief Corps and was appointed an aide upon the staff of the department president, and at the last state convention a department badge was voted to her, she being the oldest member of the order. For several years, she has ridden in the Grand Army Parade on Memorial Days. The old lady has enjoyed many a birthday party, the one on her 100th being perhaps the most notable. Crandall Relief Corps with her relatives and neighbors will gather at her table tomorrow and celebrate with her the 107th anniversary of her birth. This story came from the great state of Massachusetts, being reported in the Boston Daily Globe of January 16, 1893. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, now remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.